Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Nigeria ramps up unofficial mediation efforts in Niger ahead of a regional summit to weigh up response options to the coup leaders who took over 2 weeks ago. Also, Kenya's government and opposition restart negotiations over a bitter political feud that sparked a spate of protests over the high cost of living this year. And a quest for justice. We speak to some of the traumatised relatives of the 73 children in the Gambia whose deaths were linked to toxic cough syrups made in India. They've sued drug maker Maiden Pharmaceuticals and now wait until October for their day in court. But first, Niger's coup leaders have accused France of trying to further destabilise the country by releasing captured extremists and violating its airspace. Paris has rejected the accusation, saying that the contested flight had been in coordination with Niger's armed forces. Now, the ousting of President Mohamed Bazoum a fortnight ago sparked a domestic and regional crisis. And West African bloc ECOWAS is due to hold an emergency meeting in Nigeria on Thursday. Now, they had given the junta until last Sunday to reinstate Bazoum or face military force. Despite that, neighbouring Nigeria, whose president heads ECOWAS, is pushing all diplomatic options. The influential Nigerian and former emir of Kano, Lamidi Sanusi, says that he's already met with coup leaders to try to mediate. Meanwhile, sanctions brought against Niger over the military takeover have started to bite the most vulnerable.
They could be the most impacted by Niger's political crisis. The UN says some 4.3 million people were already in need of aid in the West African country, a figure that's likely to rise following the latest power grab, with economic sanctions threatening to increase the price of food, medicine, and other basic goods.
And the risk is that we start running out of assistance materials to be able to help out people. I'm talking about simple things that are so life-saving. I'm talking about vaccines. I'm talking about food.
Following the July 26th coup, Niger was hit by a series of sanctions, including the suspension of EU financial support, a ban on commercial transactions, and the freezing of state assets. On Sunday, military leaders announced the closing of the country's airspace, adding another logistical hurdle for aid agencies trying to bring in much-needed resources.
This has certainly interrupted some of our humanitarian operations, given that we're so reliant on having to cover vast space. It's a huge country.
For now, the UN says Niger has been able to rely on its own supplies to distribute aid, but as stocks begin to deplete, the agency warns of a looming humanitarian crisis in the West African country.
Now, ECOWAS's threats of military intervention against Niger's junta remain on the table. But West Africans from the countries that would have to supply the troops aren't all that keen on the idea. Sam Bradpeace reports from Senegal.
The people of Dakar are closely following the fallout from Niger's coup. In the Senegalese capital, many of those with whom we spoke are firmly against the prospect of an ECOWAS-led military intervention in the nearby nation.
I don't think a military solution is a good one.
The solution must be a peaceful one in which there is discussion with the putschists to see what can be done to organize democratic elections.
We should forget this military intervention idea unless the Nigerian people ask for it. I'm not speaking for my generation, but for the younger generations who will not accept it.
Last week, the Senegalese foreign minister said that Senegalese troops would take part in any mission led by ECOWAS. The commitment did not go down well at home. Some specialists warn that military action could plunge the regional bloc into an existential crisis.
There are dissenting voices and disagreements at the very heart of ECOWAS. It calls into question the relevance of ECOWAS and also its legitimacy. ECOWAS member states are not able to act freely. At the moment, we have what you could call a struggle for influence within the bloc between Russia and France. It's pitiful for ECOWAS.
The Senegalese opposition has said that any military intervention in Niger involving Senegalese troops should first be debated in the National Assembly.
Kenya's government and opposition have relaunched formal talks to try and resolve a deadly standoff that's cost at least 20 lives so far. Since March, days of demonstrations against the rising cost of living have led to clashes with police. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
All smiles despite the tense political context. Government and opposition delegations kicked off a much-anticipated round of talks in Nairobi. Both parties said they were ready to set their differences aside to try to tackle Kenya's lingering political crisis.
We come here putting the interests of the people of Kenya first. We come here determined to look for long-lasting solutions.
It was the first formal meeting between the two sides since the contested election of President William Ruto exactly 1 year ago. The Azimio coalition, led by opposition leader Raila Odinga, has since accused Ruto of rigging the polls and of failing to tackle an ongoing economic crisis. Several mass protests orchestrated by Odinga over the past year were met with a heavy police response that left at least 20 people dead. High hopes were therefore riding on Wednesday's meeting, despite the government saying the economic crisis was not on the agenda. The opposition, meanwhile, sought to reassure the public that it wasn't seeking a power-sharing arrangement with the ruling party.
We shall not negotiate, and this is important for us, for any form of power sharing with the Kenya Kwanza alliance or put any personal interest ahead of the interests of our people.
After a 2-hour meeting, both parties agreed to reconvene on Monday for a second round of talks. But time could be running out, with Raila Odinga recently threatening to return to the streets if his grievances weren't addressed by the end of the month.
Uganda says that it's in consultations with the World Bank after loans to the country were suspended because of recently introduced homophobic legislation. The lenders said that the Anti-Homosexuality Act, which was signed into law in May, fundamentally contradicts its values. The legislation is some of the harshest of its kind in the world and includes penalties of up to life in prison for gay relations under certain circumstances. Ethiopia has said that several cities in the region of Amhara have been freed after days of intense fighting between the army and militia. A 6-month state of emergency there was declared last week, but on Wednesday, 6 towns, including the capital Bahir Dar and the ancient city of Lalibela, were reportedly retaken. Tensions were sparked earlier this year there after the government said that it would dismantle regional forces across the country. Amhara nationalists said that would weaken their region. The relatives of 19 Gambian children whose deaths were linked to toxic cough syrups made in India have sued Indian drug maker Made in Pharmaceuticals, as well as local health authorities, with the first court hearing scheduled for October. At least 73 Gambian children, mostly babies and toddlers, who were given the medicine, died from acute kidney injury. Our team have been speaking to some of the bereaved parents on a quest for justice.
These photos are all that remain of Lamine Sanya. The 3-year-old died last year after drinking toxic cough syrup imported to the Gambia from India. More than 70 other children, all under the age of 5, suffered the same fate. Lamine's father, Ebrima, remembers the night before he died.
Monday night, if I'm talking to Lamine, he'll be just looking at me like this, but he will recognize my voice, but the eyes will turn in like he's looking somewhere else. From that Monday night, I lose hope.
Not long after his son's death, Ebrima set up a collective comprising dozens of bereaved parents. At least 19 of them have launched legal proceedings against Made in Pharmaceuticals, the Indian drug manufacturer, as well as the Gambian Health Ministry, the National Medicines Control Agency, and the local distributor of the cough syrup. They are seeking a total of close to $5 million in damages, but insist it is not about the money.
We want justice so that this never happens again. I lost my child, but tomorrow it could be someone else who loses theirs.
National health officials did not want to discuss the upcoming court case, but insisted that measures have been taken to improve quality control.
We feel that the market for drugs is very safe in the Gambia now because of the interventions taken by the Medicine Control Agency. Now, any drug coming into the country is tested before it's allowed to come into the country. Before, certificate of analysis alone was enough, but now, no. We are now putting in measures to ensure that this does not happen again, even if you have unscrupulous manufacturers.
The first court hearing is scheduled for October in the Gambian capital, Banjul.
And finally, an American singer described as being more popular than Elvis in South Africa has died aged 61. Sixto Rodriguez wrote protest songs in the 70s that failed to catch on in the US, but, completely unbeknownst to him, became anti-apartheid anthems for those protesting the brutality of racial segregation in South Africa. Rodriguez was reintroduced to a new generation decades later through the Academy Award-winning Searching for Sugar Man documentary, which tells of two South Africans' successful mission to track down their musical hero. He was a universal voice whose calls for justice and empathy resonated further than he ever expected. We'll leave you with the sounds of the Sugar Man.
Sugar Man, won't you hurry? 'Cause I'm